Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. I actually love this topic. What's an internet rabbit hole, or the deepest internet rabbit hole you've ever been down? I apologize for the hat. I'm working a turkey trot today, early in November. But please remember to like, share, comment, ask and listen for shout-outs, or some of my thoughts, and subscribe. Have a great one. There was a paperboy kidnapped a route over from my paper route in the mid-'80s. I've spent a lot of time reading about him to the point that I've made comments on Reddit and have been contacted by others wanting to interview me about it. Found a Twitter post of someone asking for leads on the author of an abandoned book. It related to a town in Ireland, so I tried to find a local news outlet to possibly contact. I got distracted by the obituaries on their website and came across one that had a video link that was about to start streaming, and that's how I ended up watching a random Irish grandma's funeral service for an hour. Last year I tripped over a picture of a completely destroyed porta potty from the gathering of juggalos here on Reddit, and I remember a bit of ICP from my youth. Had never been a fan, honestly, had never really given it much thought, but fell into this entire rabbit hole of researching their whole thing. My girlfriend still gives me hell about it. For days, she'd walk into my room and I'd be scrolling and she'd be like, "Are you still reading about the juggalos?" I was. That was a weird 5 or so days. A woman once got into an Uber with me. We chatted, and when she left, she told me her first name and her place of work and said, "Come find me." Looking her up felt like stalking her since she didn't have much of an internet presence. Found out why pretty soon. Turns out she was a Columbine shooting survivor. Her name was in the shooter's journal. I even ran across a cached copy of the deleted Tumblr blog that had been tracking all of the girls in that journal. Were they married? How many kids? Where they lived? Truly some of the creepiest shit I've seen on the internet about real people. Worst part is, I could never tell her I knew all of this. Sovereign citizens. It all started with either seeing or taking a picture of a strange license plate, and next thing you know, I'm learning all about this crazy movement that I had never heard about. I've forgotten most of it, but I remember there was a big thing about how if the American flag has yellow fringes on it, it's not a real flag, and it represents maritime law, and that wasn't even the craziest part. I was hungover, and a real old film was on network TV, like golden era black and white I'm talking. In that film was an eye-catching actress named Loretta Young, yeah. The story about her and her infidelity incident, particularly its after effect with Clark Gable, is became wild. All because I was too lazy to reach for my remote and change the channel. Was in a Facebook group about loving retro video games, and someone made a relevant post that was also memorializing someone who had committed suicide. I went on the person's Facebook page and spent 3 hours learning about the life and death of a complete stranger on the other side of the country from me, and I was crying, yo. The history of Rosicrucianism. It's fascinating. Basically, some fellow wrote a couple of books in the early 17th century of what we today would call utopian science fiction. It purported to be manifestos describing a secret society of enlightened masters working secretly to create an esoteric science for the betterment of humanity. Needless to say, this was completely invented by the writer, but it found a ready audience of people who very much wanted to believe it was true, and an endless stream of charlatans claiming to be those esoteric masters. Eventually, the authorities in various places became alarmed. The authorities never liked the notion of secret societies, especially working on social change, particularly in the era of religious upheaval, and the manifestos were larded with religious and Kabbalistic ideas. And they started to crack down on these Rosicrucians, which just had the effect of convincing the public that the esoteric masters actually existed. Perhaps the most bizarre and influential outcome, the so-called Invisible College of Thinkers and Scientists in England was inspired by this, which eventually morphed into the Royal Society, with luminaries like Sir Isaac Newton at the helm. In other words, in some ways simply wishing something to exist actually made something like it exist in reality, as the Royal College had tremendous influence on the actual and not imaginary history of science. It is amazing how much the early participants were into religious mysticism, alchemy, and the like, as well as what we would now call science, Newton in particular. Indeed, originally there was little to differentiate a natural philosopher from a good old-fashioned alchemist or magician or esoteric master, and it is interesting how that separation came to exist. Something ongoing in the era, namely that science, as it came to be known eventually, was based on a methodology that emphasized communication of information and repeatable results, rather than hidden or esoteric knowledge, and as a consequence, proved to be more useful. The notion of Rosicrucianism also, of course, gave birth to numerous societies bearing that name, all claiming descent from the original manifestos and leaning more on the esoteric and mystic side. Perhaps the original manifestos are truly among the most influential secular work of fiction ever. I don't know if it's the deepest ever, but during COVID I was bored like everyone else and joined a Facebook group called Investigation Connection, and someone posted that they were adopted and looking for their siblings. In another life I'd be a PI, and COVID gave me plenty of time for internet sleuthing. I stayed up all night, but I found a girl's entire family. She had tried her entire life to find them. After COVID, she got to meet them and tagged me in it. Pretty cool. A few years ago, I ended up somehow on a Wikipedia list of all US federal prisons. They ended up with me going to every individual site for each prison and seeing who the famous people who had ever been there were. Then, reading up on each individual, it was a huge rabbit hole, but very interesting. A young woman on Reddit said she was going to off herself. Using her post history, I figured out where she lived, where she worked, called and spoke to someone who knew her in real life. They gave me the name of her boyfriend, found his number. Turns out that he had broken up with her but still cared, so he went over and stopped her. I was up all night. This was all under a different username from the one I currently use. Hermit crabs. I don't own or desire to own hermit crabs, but one day I stumbled across a hermit crab care information by accident and couldn't stop reading. I spent the entire day on this. I eventually ended up on some blog detailing what happened when a guy apparently well known in the hermit crab keeping hobby forums passed away, and how they handled finding care for his massive amount of pet hermit crabs after. The most interesting thing I learned is that you have to be careful with a hermit crab that just molted. If they're in a tank with multiple hermit crabs eat their shed skin to regain the nutrients. If the newly molted crab runs into others while the smell of shed skin is still on it, the others will go, "Oh yay, tasty shed skin," and eat it. They actually make a special scent remover you can wash your crab in to remedy this. So I'll tell you guys about a rabbit hole that probably not many of you, if any, know. There was an online game called Majestic. It was probably around 2002-ish, 2003 to 2004. I don't remember when, but I played it online. It was like this conspiracy game about like aliens or like weird murders, but it was interactive. Like it would call your house. This is early cell phone times. It would use your fax machine or email you. It was super smart and I loved it. And then, as cryptic as it was, one day it just disappeared. Like apparently it was sold to Electronic Arts and there was like a fake company in the game, but then EA really bought it and they tried to turn it into like a platform, but it was online and there were message boards where we were trying to solve these puzzles and there'd be videos that you'd have to go search from obscure URLs. It was really great. If you could find anything on Majestic, it was a small window of time on the internet. Sorry, this went a minute. I know this is long, but if any of you ever played Majestic, I'd love to hear from you because it was really like, I don't think it was longer than 3 months, but it was really cool and I'm surprised no one's done anything like that since. So anyway, that's my rabbit hole and 9/11. About 8 years ago, I read about how Chinese immigrants started and transformed the way Americans ate. These were in essence the first fast food establishments. During the building of the first transcontinental railroad, it turned into such an interest that I've almost perfected the techniques, cookware, and the ingredients used to make the most popular Chinese takeout items. Okay, I finally have a place to talk about this. I stumbled upon a YouTube video about an entire family that was basically an incest cesspool. Unbelievable amounts of abuse of all kinds has been taking place within the family for multiple generations that went on until 2012. It was honestly one of the most disgusting and abhorrent things I've ever learned about. What even getting weirder is, even after this family was discovered, which took decades because they lived out in the middle of nowhere and were isolated from society, multiple family members had active Instagram and social media accounts that were public with pictures. Like, I went down an entire rabbit hole of at least 10 to 15 different family members' Instagram accounts. Some even had posts with disturbing comments toward each other. I had the thought that these could have been faked, but it was weird that a lot of the pictures uploaded weren't anywhere else online. It was also already proven that an account on TikTok made by a younger member was legitimate, and everything I was finding myself through these social media accounts were extremely bizarre and sad. It's been a while since I came across this, so I may have a few details backwards, but I believe this was the Colt family, known as the Colt clan incest case, and Colt is not their real name. The only reason I went down the rabbit hole of their social media was after finding a random post online that had doxed their real name. The entire thing still feels like a fever dream. It was so disturbing. I once spent a long weekend looking into the theory online that rock musician Andrew W.K. was an industry plant, that he was really a character of an energetic rock star performed by an actor, and that he had been replaced. It didn't help that although he almost always wore his uniform of filthy white shirt and pants, his appearance has varied over the years based on hair and beard length, and that one time years before, I had seen pictures of what looked to be an Andrew WK cosplayer at an event and was confused. A few years ago, I stumbled into a forgotten corner of the web while trying to find an old NASA livestream archive. One link led to a Japanese FTP site that was still online, filled with folders labeled in strange shorthand like STS-115X and Orbital Debrief 1999. Inside were grainy videos and audio logs that seemed real. NASA insignias, launch chatter, and coordinates. But none of the missions matched anything public. Some of the clips even had what looked like internal commentary about visual interference and foreign telemetry signatures. The deeper I dug, the more the timestamps overlapped with actual shuttle missions. Then one day, the whole server vanished, replaced with a 403 error page that had a single blinking underscore in the corner, like a command prompt waiting for input. To this day, I've never found anyone who's seen it or heard of it. Even the Wayback Machine skips over it like it was never there. I don't know what I found, maybe some elaborate hoax, but every so often I get the urge to search those mission codes again. Nothing ever comes up, but every few months my search history still shows STS-115X sitting there, even when I know I didn't type it. Man, when I was a teenager, I got so into research chemicals, but without any real access to them aside from clonazepam and DXM until uni. I would stay up all night reading about stimulants, psychedelics, opioids, benzos, dissociatives, etc. And because I didn't have access, I just imagined what it was like to be on them. Really got it into my head that using them would make me a better person. Only years later, and after I finally was able to get my hands on a variety of them, did I realize they were an escape, a sort of performative way to be cool and above others. Yeah, right. It did teach me I was good at reading and summarizing research, though, and I now am a psychologist, CBT therapist. Go figure. It's been a long time, but way back in the early days of the World Wide Web, 97-98, there was a site called Web Roulette. You'd go on the site, press refresh, and you'd be presented with 5 completely random URLs. Most of them were random documents, the kind of stuff you'd find on the deep web these days, mostly just data or papers on stuff that anybody not involved would be incredibly confused about, or random business websites, but every once in a while you'd be presented with a hidden gem. One morning in computer class, I clicked refresh and was presented with a link to a site on a web ring, a bunch of sites associated with the same thing and linked together, focused on a jihad to destroy Barney the dinosaur. It was a bunch of stories, poems, text-based RPGs, and original artwork focused around Barney as an evil entity out to destroy our children. One of my personal favorites was a parody of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven called The Barney. It's been almost 30 years and I still swing by from time to time to see if there's new content. Quantum mechanics and physics. It's movement in different fields and webs. The movement in a field determines what we call the particle or wave. The light is like LOL at time, and it's pure kinetic energy, meaning it has no standing mass. That my brain is melting with this new information because I'm too stubborn to math, so now I'm like, I can't go any further without at least understanding math, and my brain is melting, like, what determines the fields? Like, what? Now black holes are on my list of things that make my stomach flip thinking about. The list doesn't make sense or have any logic behind it. If you are really curious about my list, it's sea stars, jellyfish, longworms chilling at the bottom of the ocean, gooey ducks, some species of mushrooms, and otters. So black holes are my newest addition to that list. I stumbled onto a Reddit post about the darkest, most heinous, hard-to-read Wikipedia articles a couple weeks ago. As someone who doesn't watch horror movies or even much of the news and refuses to watch the crime shows my wife watches because I don't like to even for a minute think of the evil people that are out there, it was a very bad 30 minutes or so before I had to put it down and try to forget it. I am without qualification an old son of a bitch, and I can testify that if you have the right kind of mind, you don't need no lame-ass internet to fall 1,000 feet into a rabbit hole using a library. The book by A.C. Clarke, titled The Fountains of Paradise, had a rabbit hole bait line that went something like this. On the wall was a picture from Rolt's famous classic of Brunel standing in front of the anchor chains of the Great Western. Today, you can type that into Google and duplicate my card catalog search in a single minute. My search in 1980 wandered through the University of Idaho's library and wound up with correspondence with the institutions of civil engineers in the UK. My fall led me to developing Probability, the most complete collection of literature of the life of the Victorian engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the carbolic acid powdered locomotive, the Great Western, the tunnel under the Thames, a train driven by remote, compressed air. I began with Isambard Kingdom Brunel by L.T.C. Rolt, and wound up receiving a blueprint elevation of the Royal Albert Bridge at Saltash. I am delighted with falling into rabbit holes. My very first began in 1969 with a hitchhiking road trip to California, rooming in a genuine warehouse in Long Beach, a tour in Vietnam, a 4-year tour in Germany, and a So-18 donation to the Imperial War Museum in London. A girl I went to high school with, who was going through a mental health crisis or drug-induced psychosis, she would live stream for hours, and the things she would say and do were crazy. I wanted everything in shock and horror, and got so invested, it went on for months, and then she would disappear and come back. It's been silent for about a year now, and I wonder how she's doing. I researched her and found some court records as well. I hope she's getting better. In recent years, probably the Creepshow art drama. If you were terminally online during the COVID, just post-lockdown era, you probably heard that a YouTuber was outed for being a 4chan, well, Lelcow, which is basically 4chan, but with mean girls instead of incels, user, and a stalker. She'd managed to make a lot of acquaintances in the commentary space, so virtually every commentary YouTuber had to cover it. What you might not know is that this drama was the direct result of another YouTuber, Toby, making a call-out video on Creepshow art over a year prior that snowballed into several dramas that were all interconnected. Toby's call-out video was actually alright, but it turned out to be a fleeting moment of rationality for her, and she was deeply volatile and reactionary otherwise. Even so, she can't have foreseen how that video indirectly led to Creepshow actually being exposed as a stalker. Cecil McFly has a very helpful video considering the entire 2 or so years worth of bullshit. If any of you have 4 hours to spare or need some low-stakes bullshit to listen to while you're working, I'm just going to clarify here that Shannon's lalcow used was less about being on the website and more about the stuff she said there. She talked about a lot of YouTubers she was acquainted and even friends with, wove a whole tissue of lies about Peaches and Emily, and occasionally used the odd slur or two. People kind of forgot about lalcow stuff once the stalker allegation came out. The Sailing Stones of Death Valley. They're a bunch of stones that very, very slowly move around the desert, leaving cool tracks due to their weight pressing down on the dried mud of the desert. The mechanism of how they move is interesting in its own right. Basically, below freezing temperatures at night cause minute ice crystals to form, and any breeze moves the stone a tiny little bit as this happens, happening again and again every night, adding up to a noticeable movement. They move the farthest in winter. The research that discovered all this is kinda cute. In the 1970s, they decided to figure it out, so they labeled and carefully tracked the exact location of a few dozen of these stones every single day for years. They gave them names. At first it was Stone A and Stone B, but as researchers familiarized themselves with the stones, they began to use nicknames for each one instead: Mary, Susan, etc. One of the heaviest, 320 kilograms, Karen, actually got lost at one point. Nobody could find her for a few years, despite how carefully everything was recorded. How heavy Karen was and how few people frequented the inhospitable area. Plus, people, animals, and vehicles leave tracks in dry mud, just as the stones famously do. So if someone came and hauled her away in a truck, there would be very clear signs, but no, she just vanished into thin air. How can a great big rock ever get lost at all? The researchers were adorably, really worried and upset until she reappeared later, safe and sound. It's still a mystery what happened to her, but she and the other stones are even more closely monitored now. Nowadays, the stones have GPSs attached and all sorts of fancy cameras to record the infinitesimal movements. But the stones are moving less, and there are concerns that climate change will cause them to ultimately become sedentary, like regular rocks. You can feel the sadness of the scientists involved when you read the interviews that care so much about those rocks. The weirdest stuff by far is all the bonkers conspiracy theories. People think the stones are proof that aliens built the pyramids, that we're all in the Matrix, that invisible angels are basically playing a very slow soccer game, or that underneath there is a subterranean psychic training facility hidden by the government. When I was like 14 or 15, I was super into looking into paranormal videos and sites. It was like my final magic might be real fascination. I'd watch hours of footage and get duped into the analysis telling me that because of these pixels, there's no way this could be faked. It's a real ghost. And then they going through the idea of how, if ghosts are real, what are they? Are they literal spirits we all have to walk the earth after we die? Are they moments captured in time somehow? Are they people from other dimensions and timelines slipping through the universe? I grew out of it after exploring abandoned hospitals and such once I could drive, and also realizing that if a real ghost were ever captured on film, it would be talked about everywhere. And the modern world has too many cameras. There's no way there would be zero provable evidence at this point. I still like to go on ghost tours and explore abandoned haunted locations. I enjoy the atmosphere, even though I know there will never actually be a ghost. UAP and government disinformation campaigns and cover-ups. The government literally conducted a disinformation operation in which they intentionally created a cultural stigma against UFO sightings and reports so that we don't believe that anyone who talked about it or had experiences were crazy. They even infiltrated UFO groups to feed them misleading information. And now they're trying to reverse it by rebranding it UAP and admitting they're real. They are regularly interacting with our Navy and Air Force in restricted airspace in 2025 and have been for years, and have even somehow turned our nukes on and off when hovering above them at every nuclear silo, as in began the launch countdown, then turned it off last minute during the Cold War. This has also occurred at Russia's nuclear sites. A beam was reported to have been coming out of the UFO into the silo when this happened. The flying machines that are piloted seem to defy the laws of physics as we understand them, and our government stated aren't from there. They are not ours, and no other country could have this kind of tech, as in huge flying machines that are shaped like a cigar, saucer, or triangle with no visible means of propulsion, hypersonic speeds, instantaneous acceleration and deceleration, stopping instantaneously and hovering in midair, making 90-degree turns instantaneously, are silent when flying, can move through air, plunge into the oceans, and move through water, then come back up without hindrance, have stealth characteristics, some emit an electrostatic charge surrounding the machine, etc. In one instance, an Air Force pilot reported a large cigar-shaped vehicle that was playing cat and mouse with him and exhibiting the above characteristics, seemed to disappear only to reappear at his secret rendezvous location in the air, where he had planned on heading next without communication. Many Air Force pilots have stated that they saw occupants in the craft, and they were not human. Even weirder, though, is that a very large number of witnesses say they did see human-looking occupants on board, but much taller than people, Nordic-looking, always the same description alongside non-human occupants. Some researchers have speculated that this could mean some of the vehicles are time travelers from the future, and it's possible that non-human beings are basically biological robots they built. Would explain why being told about future events telepathically. Apparently, they have an understanding of consciousness we don't yet, and experiencing strange effects with time is a very common thread among people who report interactions. Almost every country that has resources have had a task force that tracks and studies the UFOs. For decades, it's a global phenomenon. That's insane, and no one is really talking about it. In the last congressional hearing on UAPs in 2024 that you can watch on YouTube, military veterans and intelligence officials such as Ryan Graves and David Grush started and stated under oath that there exist reverse engineering programs with material from retrieval programs that operated at UFO crash sites, and that the UFOs are not of this Earth. They also changed the wording from extraterrestrial to non-human intelligences, because they believe the phenomenon may be hyperdimensional as opposed to extraterrestrial. A slow drip disclosure started in June of 2021 with the New York Times piece. The stated concern with being even more forthcoming than they have in public panic and societal destabilization. The Pentagon released actual footage, although definitely not their best footage, and everyone is acting like what was in those videos is normal. It's crazy. I was actually shocked at how much real scientific evidence there was on the topic. Thousands and thousands of extremely trustworthy people have reported these experiences, including astronauts, and including experiences that involve multiple witnesses at once, of the first through fourth kind, including landings and abductions. Confirmation of the eyewitness reports with high-level radar and other physical tools, including scientific analysis of material from crash sites that has been made public by a professor at Stanford University, who stated they were not made on Earth, and studies on the patterns of their interactions with us that go back to ancient times, including declassified documents. A related rabbit hole is the connection between the occult and the people that ran the American and Russian space program, as well as the occult practices of people who have genius insights that led to new technologies and new scientific paradigms in general. Jack Parsons was a rocket scientist that founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and was a devotee of Aleister Crowley. What's weird is the Russians also have a secret Soviet space program led by people that had similar beliefs and also engaged in similar occult practices that paralleled the American space program. I went down that rabbit hole after reading American Cosmic, which was written by someone that was very much an atheist when it comes to this stuff, who was shocked at what she discovered. Her name is Diana Pasulka. She's talked about her book in podcasts. The proven disinformation campaign that our government has admitted they engaged in, that this topic is only believed by crazies, has worked so well that most people are not open to really looking at the evidence. In American Cosmic, the author claims that our current scientific paradigm of naturalism and materialism, with its stigma of certain topics like UAP and parapsychology, is not believed by the people at the highest level of various government programs, nor is it believed by top scientists of top universities, the kind of scientists who work on breakthrough science and technology, nor the scientists that requested a pseudonym for her book because their work led to tech we don't want other countries or companies to develop first. The paradigm they have of reality, the one they use, is very different and would be mocked by mainstream society. The current dominant paradigm in science is actually not what the rational and intelligent people at the top believe, unlike what we are led to think by the public figures like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene. On that note, people act like the CIA's remote viewing program, for example, was just this silly, misguided, and pointless operation the CIA managed for over 20 years but didn't actually work, and they didn't realize, lol. Their declassified documents clearly show it did. Just because Stargate ended after 2 decades doesn't mean one with a different name didn't take its place. Reality is a whole lot weirder and a whole lot more interesting than people want to realize.